In business today, three things to know. First, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry arrives in Kiev with a billion-dollar offer, as Russia says no invasion of the Ukraine is imminent, dialing back tensions. But what will tomorrow bring? Then, President Obama delivers his 2015 budget. Now the tug of war begins between Democrats and Republicans over who gets what tax breaks and who will pay more. And it's Fat Tuesday. We'll have a look at the economic comeback of New Orleans. AriseXchange starts now. Hello, everyone. I'm Andrew Schmertz. If you just looked at the markets and got your news from there, yesterday the world was ending. Today, all is well. Neither, of course, is true. But for the moment, the crisis in the Ukraine has been dialed back. Russian President Vladimir Putin says he has called troops back to their bases and that there is no ultimatum to the Ukrainian peninsula of Crimea to surrender. That news followed Secretary of State John Kerry arriving in Kiev, pledging $1 billion in loan guarantees for Ukraine, a country that is on the economic brink. All of this reversed Monday's trend where stocks tanked and gold soared. So let's take a look at the numbers on Wall Street today. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 227 to 16,395. The S&P 500 up 2818 to 1873.91. And the NASDAQ up a healthy 74.67, 1.75% to 435.197. Taking a look at stocks we're watching today. Facebook reportedly making plans to buy, get this, a drone maker. Mexico-based Titan Aerospace for $60 million. Titan manufactures solar-powered drones that could stay airborne for approximately 5 years, which would help Facebook provide internet access globally. Facebook closing up, $136 to 68.77. Apple's chief financial officer, Peter Oppenheimer, calling it quits after spending almost 2 decades at the company. Apple's vice president of finance and corporate controller, Luca Maestri, will step in as finance chief. On Monday, Oppenheimer was named to the board of Goldman Sachs as an independent director. They like the news. Apple shareholders up 302 to 530.78. And the Shack is closed. Struggling electronics retailer Radio Shack says it's shutting the doors to 1,100 of its U.S. stores after reporting a loss of $191.4 million, or $1.90 a share, compared with a loss a year earlier of $63.3 million, or 63 cents a share. Radio Shack closing down 46 cents to 226. I guess those Super Bowl ads haven't helped. Taking a look at commodities, gold closing down 15.40. That's the big pullback we were talking about today to 13.34, and oil backing off a little bit too, down to 103.22. Back to the Ukraine, where world leaders are reacting to the escalating crisis. Here is what President Obama had to say today.
The international community has condemned Russia's violation of the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine. We've condemned their intervention in Crimea, and we are calling for a de-escalation of the situation and international monitors that can go into the country right away.
That de-escalation. For more now, we go to Ivan Eland from the Independent Institute. Ivan, welcome back to AriseXchange. You've been terrific on this.
Thanks for having me on.
So, woke up this morning a little bit surprised by the sort of turn in events. Did the Russian president here blink?
Well, I think he's still reserving the right to go into eastern Ukraine if he wants to, and he certainly has the capability to do it. So, but in the immediate scheme of things, returning the troops if they go back to their bases, that's of course a good thing. And I think he'll probably stay in control of Crimea, just like he did with parts of Georgia in the last decade. So these are Russian-speaking areas, and he wants to safeguard that port down there. That's the only warm water port that the Russians have, and it's very valuable to them, and it has been historically.
So he's sort of managing Crimea, are you saying, by proxy then? I mean, John Kerry basically said, I can't believe this guy because he's saying there's no Russian troops in Crimea. I guess technically maybe there aren't Russian troops, but there's someone running around with masks and guns, right?
well, there's somebody that's very friendly to the Russian government taking over. I think that's probably a falsehood. But I think, the real thing is he says he's going to have a referendum. And I think the Russians probably would win a referendum, and they probably would win one in eastern Ukraine, because I think the population there is the Russian speaking, they're Orthodox, whereas the western part of the country is Ukrainian speaking and Catholic. I mean, it's not quite that simple, but that's basically what it is. And so these parts of Ukraine probably would want to either go back into Russia or be independent states separate from the main body of Ukraine.
Now, John Kerry came running in today with about $1 billion, at least a start. What role is that money going to have here? Because now we have a relatively pro-Western regime in place, at least in Kiev.
Well, it's sort of a drop in the bucket. The Ukrainian government, if you believe their figures, they said they need $35 billion over the next 2 months just to, put
the lights on.
Put the finger in the dike. But their economy is so far gone. I mean, I think they're going to have internal reforms, which means IMF austerity. But that's not going to make the people any happier. So I think we're going to see a lot of instability in Ukraine for a long time.
Well, let me ask you this: who has the better resources here, the EU and the U.S. or Russia, to step in economically, and might that sway the difference even in eastern Ukraine?
Well, I think, the European Union and the United States are much wealthier than Russia. But, of course, that's relative because the EU has had a financial crisis, the worst in its history. The U.S. has had a deep recession, and we have a big budget deficit. And so even these rich countries are less likely to provide aid for Ukraine. There's only so much their populations will let them do, as we've seen in the Germans in the EU when that crisis occurred. So I think we're at a bit of a handicap. If I were Vladimir Putin, I'd just let things play out. I think the government may swing back to his side eventually.
That's interesting. So you think that time is very much on the side of Russia here?
Right. Well, that is if they don't detach the eastern parts of Ukraine, right off the bat. But if they leave Ukraine the way it is, then I think, Yanukovych won a legitimate election in 2010, and, the economy is so bad. It's just like in the United States. I think anywhere in the world, if the economy is bad, they're going to vote the people out if they can. So it might behoove Vladimir Putin to just wait a while.
Okay, well, this is certainly a situation that is moving hour by hour, really. We can wake up tomorrow and the whole world once again changes. Ivan Eland, appreciate it.
Thank you.
President Obama submits his budget, and a leading Republican congressman comes up with his own tax reform plan. Find out what it is when we come back here on AriseXchange.
News can definitely be improved when reflecting diversity.
A lot of mainstream news, they don't dive into it.
Who wants to hear about negativity all the time?
They only show what they think people want to know and not what people really should know.
World-based stories. That's what I enjoy the most.
I think diversity of news is important to the world so that everybody will be aware of their surroundings and what is happening today.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
Today, President Obama unveiled his nearly $4 trillion budget proposal for next year. It included more tax credits for working families while scaling back on breaks for the wealthiest Americans in what he is trying to do, which is close that, quote, income gap that he talks about. Although the budget isn't expected to be enacted by Congress, and there's virtually no chance it will in its form, it does give the president's fiscal vision for the country. Joining us now by phone from Washington to talk more about the future budget is Grace Marie Turner, president of the Gallon Institute, a conservative-leaning think tank. Grace Marie, appreciate you coming back here on AriseXchange.
Pleasure to be with you. Thank you so much.
Let me ask you something. The New York Times calls this a budget that has big ideas and little hope of passing. So what's the point?
Well, the president has to produce a budget, but unfortunately what he has done is really produce a political document. This is really designed to give talking points to Democratic congressional and senatorial candidates for the 2014 elections. And it's really distressing to me that this is not a serious document that addresses the very real problems we have in our country, especially the need to begin the process of entitlement reform and to begin the process of getting our debt and our deficit down and getting our economy back in
Well,
gear.
but you talk about the deficit. We are seeing a falling deficit here over the last few years, and of course, according to the Congressional Budget Office, that going forward. So isn't he accomplishing that?
One of the reasons the deficit is going down is because taxes are going up. And when taxes go up, that means that there's less money in the economy to create the new jobs. If the employment numbers reflected the real unemployment in this country, including all of the people who've dropped out, as you know, it would be closer to 11%, not 6 or 7%.
Well, that's true.
Part of that is because the federal government is sucking so many resources out of the economy that they're not there to go back in to create the jobs, to create the new companies, so that people can go back to work.
But to some extent, we're seeing a growing GDP, and that does play into sort of a rising tax base. I want to talk to you about the issue of taxes, and this is really where the big disconnect between the two parties come. The president wants to do things like include doubling the earned income tax credit for low-wage workers, as well as other tax breaks, including a plan, by the way, to reduce the corporate tax rate, while Republicans are looking for cuts across the board on taxes.
Republicans very much. And the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, Dave Camp, introduced legislation, I believe, last week that is a serious effort to begin the conversation over tax reform. And it would broaden the base so that you would have fewer of the loopholes that really force both individuals and companies to jump through those loopholes in order to get the tax break, rather than putting that money where it might actually produce more jobs, more revenue, and ultimately more tax base, a bigger tax base for the federal government.
Well, not all.
There is a big difference.
Yeah, not all Republicans, though, are jumping onto Congressman Camp's tax plan. But it is a start of the conversation. But what is going to take us then to get to that tax reform? Because the president is putting out a proposal there to reduce corporate tax rates, which has no chance of passing.
Well, but one of the things he has is a $1.8 trillion tax increase that across the board, but primarily on the people who create jobs in this country. So it's really just, it's trade-offs, and it's basically saying that he wants more social spending and he's going to tax the rich to pay for it. What the Republicans want to do is really get the economy going by lowering tax rates across the board, giving people a greater incentive to create jobs, to produce revenues, to produce new profits so that we can have more revenues coming into the federal government. A different way than trying to increase taxes on the existing base.
Let me ask you about Congressman Ryan's recent report that says the war on poverty has been a failure, but that the Republicans have to come up with their own plan for poverty.
I think he's absolutely right, and this is really a passion of Paul's. During the 2012 presidential campaign, when he was really wanting to make this an important centerpiece of his effort as a vice presidential candidate, to talk about lowering the poverty rates. The rising tide lifts all boats, and he wants to make sure that we're allowing people who are just getting their foot on the ladder.
If he can't get Democrats to sign on board because of the atmosphere in Washington, this is going to go nowhere.
I think that's right, which is why I think we're going to have another election and maybe a presidential election before we can really get going with some of these reform proposals. But as you said before, this is a good start, both with Dave Camp's tax reform and also with the budget proposal that Paul Ryan put out today, which actually does balance, unlike the president's budget.
Okay, Grace Marie Turner from the Gallon Institute. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Time now for our business ticker. Another major delay for the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. The White House expected to announce a new directive allowing insurers to continue offering health plans that do not meet the Affordable Care Act's minimum coverage requirements. Again, the president doing this without congressional authorization. The delay in implementing the rule will avoid another wave of health policy cancellations this fall during election season, and therefore help ease pressure possibly on Democrats. So you wonder why he's doing it. More bitcoins in the real money they represent has gone missing. Flexcoin, which called itself the world's first Bitcoin bank, was wiped out Sunday by hackers who stole the digital currency valued at more than $600,000, forcing the startup to close permanently. Just last week, Mt. Gox, one of the largest Bitcoin exchanges, declared bankruptcy following a $500 million cyber theft Although the cases have not hurt Bitcoin trading, they do highlight the problems relating to the digital cash and its lack of regulations, leaving users with little recourse when their accounts are wiped out. Disney and Dish Network have reached a landmark deal after a month of talks. The two companies have reached a long-term programming agreement that allows the #2 satellite provider to carry Disney-owned networks such as ABC and ESPN. As part of the deal, Dish agreed to stop its auto hop commercial skipping feature for ABC shows on its digital video recorder, which had sparked a lawsuit between the two companies. It also paves the way for Dish to one day offer internet-delivered TV services. No financial details have been released. And here's how to insult an entire state's population in one ad, especially a state where you do business. An ad campaign for Dove soap made by Unilever features a woman in a white tank top raising an arm to display her underarm. The ad says, quote, "Dear New Jersey, when people call you the armpit of America, take it as a compliment." Turns out many New Jersey residents don't like their state being referred to as an armpit. We have a couple of New Jerseyans here, right? Yep. And let Unilever know it, some even threatening a boycott. Needless to say, it didn't take long for the company, also headquartered in New Jersey, to drop its plans for the billboards. But many of those billboards ended up on TV anyway. Africa has become a new hotbed for investors in recent years. However, will new anti-gay legislation hurt the continent's image? Take a look at this map. 37 African countries have some kind of anti-gay legislation in place, with Uganda and Nigeria imposing some of the toughest laws, including prison sentences. On Monday, the Ugandan president signed a bill imposing severe punishment for gays, very similar to the new law signed by Nigerian President Goodluck Jonathan. Last month, Derek Irwin joins us from Boston by phone. He is a portfolio manager of the Wells Fargo Advantage Emerging Markets, which has $4.5 billion under management. Derek, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, good afternoon.
So I got to ask you, Africa is going in a different direction than Europe and certainly the United States on this issue. If it wants to be open for business, I would think that it wants to be as inclusive as possible. So what is the risk here to Africa that they're going to start losing investment dollars?
Yeah, I think it's something we need to take into account. Look, when a country or even an individual company takes a stand on an issue that denies people their basic human rights, I think investors such as myself have to take that into account when we assess the risks in those countries. And it's not just a moral issue, although it's certainly an important one, but it's also a pragmatic investment issue. Is there increased political risk? Will this affect the growth in that economy or of a particular company? So it is an important issue that we have to take into account, even as sort of hard-headed investors.
You know, I spoke with Richard Branson when we were in Davos, and Branson is big on this issue, and he's big on CEOs of international companies speaking out. Are we going to start seeing more CEOs of international companies speaking on the subject? And he specifically raises the issue, for example, of Apple, with Tim Cook as the CEO. Apple does a lot of business in Africa.
Yeah, I think more and more, as you point out, Virgin has suggested that companies boycott Uganda in the wake of their new laws, and I think we're going to need to see more and more of that, frankly, because it makes it difficult for these companies, these large multinationals, to invest in these countries when they're trying to protect their brand and trying to protect their image. So absolutely, I think we'll see more of it.
You know, I wonder if there's a little bit of a comparison, if you will, to what's going on in Russia and the Ukraine, in that Russia is maybe backing off a little bit because its business interests are threatened, when Africa's business interests is, for example, Nigeria, about to become possibly the largest country in Africa from a money standpoint. When its business interests get threatened, it might react.
I think it's a possibility. I think that Nigeria in particular, or a lot of these African nations, are responding to a number of different pressures right now, and that are more than just, I think, moral and traditional values there. I think that they're concerned about slowing growth in many of their economies, and in many ways these laws and these using gays as scapegoats, I think, are a way to distract from weakening economies. And to the extent that multinational investors begin to pull back more and further weaken their economies, it may in the short term make things worse.
Derek,
but hopefully over time it does
Derek,
send
as a
a message
Derek, as a portfolio
play in the international stage.
Derek, as a portfolio fund manager dealing in emerging markets, are you starting to feel pressure from clients? Are you hearing, I want to steer investments differently?
I think we generally get guidelines and guidance from our clients regarding basic human rights issues. This particular issue has not come up in part because our fund, being a emerging market strategy versus what they call a frontier strategy, doesn't have direct investments in Nigeria, although we certainly have indirect investments. And Uganda is such a small market that it really doesn't hit the radar screen.
And Derek, let me ask you, are you comfortable?
I think if it continues, we will.
And are you comfortable then when you get to that point that you may have to make some decisions that are not necessarily in your economic best interest?
You know, I think you gotta weigh the risks of issues like this and other human rights issues very carefully when you're making your assessment. But the reality is that that human rights issues and economic issues often go hand in hand.
Okay, Derek Irwin, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ahead, why one teen is suing her parents. Our favorite person of the day is next, right here on AriseXchange.
I think that people in America do care about what happens throughout the world.
Global warming is probably something that has to be addressed sooner rather than later.
From Somalia and the genocide there, and that's something people don't know about. They have no idea the brevity of that situation.
The first thing I think about when I think of Africa is like war and famine and disease.
And right now with the tsunami that happened or the earthquakes in, Japan, we always look out for other people.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
Well, Arise is the only network that really covers comprehensively the African diaspora. It gives people in other parts of the world of color a chance to know about people here in the United States, us to know about them, and the world to know about us. So it's kind of an educational experience for everybody involved. Getting to know people through stories, through personal stories. You really get a chance to know what people are actually all about, what communities are about. How are we different? But more importantly, what commonalities we all share.
We have a liquid lunch for you today, things that make us want to drink. A San Francisco woman claims she was attacked because she wore Google Glass at a bar, which she now calls a Google Glass hate crime. San Francisco resident Sarah Slocum said she was at a punk bar wearing the, some would say, obnoxious Google Glass when a man allegedly ripped the glasses off her face and stole her purse. She posted this on Facebook. OMG. So you'll never believe this, but I got verbally and physically assaulted and robbed last night because of some Google Glass haters. But witnesses at the bar told a local reporter that she was running around making a spectacle of herself while recording people in the bar with the Google Glass. The glass does have a camera on them. The bar, Molotovs, is said to be a punk bar, not the place for loud technology geeks in the first place. And some said she should have been more sensitive. Now, Slocum, who calls herself a Google Glass hate crime victim, thinks Google should send her to the tech conference South by Southwest. She tweeted, "It would be awesome if Google would sponsor my trip to South by Southwest so I can formally continue to help educate the public about Google Glass." Just as if she was educating people, say, about endangered whales. No word yet from Google, but Google does have a website dedicated to the do's and don'ts of wearing Google Glass in public. And that takes us to our favorite person of the day, one person who grabbed our attention and not for the right reasons. Today, it is a New Jersey high school cheerleader who is suing her parents because, well, her parents asked her to do some household chores. 18-year-old Rachel Canning says her parents kicked her out of the house and now won't pay for her fancy private high school and for college. So the father of her best friend, a lawyer, is now suing Rachel's parents to make them pay. Rachel's parents say their daughter, a straight-A student with, quote, a rebellious side, is making it all up, that she ran away from home in November because she would not follow simple house rules. Those rules included some chores. Rachel claims her parents made her dump her boyfriend as well. And so the saga of having a teenage daughter goes. But it gets better. Rachel had her school called Child Protective Services after she claimed abuse. Her father says the investigator determined that she was just, quote, a spoiled kid. Now Rachel is attempting to compel her parents to foot the bill for tuition at the University of Vermont, which is her first choice. The happy family in court Tuesday, so we will no doubt have breaking news updates on this tomorrow. Until then, Rachel Canning is our favorite person of the day. Next, the Mardi Gras economy on this Fat Tuesday. You're watching AriseXchange.
I think media and reporters have a lot to answer for.
AIDS, hunger, people not having running water, the things that we just take for granted.
I think the most important issues in the world today are education and poverty.
Terrorism and war, I guess, is always. It's always an issue, and the quality of life of certain groups of people in certain areas.
I think inequality.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
It's Fat Tuesday, the last hurrah before the Catholic season of Lent begins on Ash Wednesday. And no other U.S. city celebrates the day in grander fashion than New Orleans and Mardi Gras. There is much to celebrate in the region. The city's resurgence post-Katrina has been miraculous, and no one knows this better than our next guest, Mark Morial, who served as mayor for the city from 1994 to 2002 and now serves as National Urban League president and CEO. Mr. Mayor, it is an honor to have you here on AriseXchange. Thank you.
It's great to be with you, and happy Mardi Gras.
And happy Mardi Gras. I hope to go out and spend a little time here in New York City, certainly not in New Orleans. Tell me a little bit about what Mardi Gras has meant to that city over the years, especially since Katrina, because I remember when the hurricane hit and people said it's never going to be the same.
Mardi Gras has been a rallying point for both New Orleanians and those New Orleanians who were displaced, who returned to New Orleans for Mardi Gras. It's also been a way that visitors from all over the world have an opportunity to experience the uniqueness of New Orleans culture. And what Mardi Gras is it's a cultural celebration. If my numbers are, if my memory serves me correct, the economic impact of Mardi Gras is about $1 billion, and that includes visitor spending, but it's also parade crews that parade through the streets. They're done without corporate sponsorships, so people pay dues to carnival parading organizations. Elaborate floats are designed and built.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, has it become a little bit too commercialized? Because I think of the Halloween parade, for example, here in New York City, that has become a big corporate sponsorship platform. Do you think it's too commercialized or good for the city?
That's why there's been a local ordinance plus a custom that there are no corporate sponsorships allowed along the parade route, no political sponsorships allowed along the parade route, so that these parades, which are one of the most important features of Mardi Gras, have remained very pure and really unfettered by corporate sponsorships. You'll see some corporate sponsorships at parties and balls and other sorts of ancillary events, but the public expression with the parading and the costuming.
All right, let me ask you about the overall comeback of New Orleans.
And clear of corporate sponsorships.
Let me ask you about the overall comeback of the city, including, by the way, the resurgent Saints over the last few years. What has brought New Orleans back? Has it been the federal government? Has it been the people in the city, the state, people sticking around when so many left? Were you afraid that there would be just a flight of brainpower and talent out of that city?
I think that what's helped to propel New Orleans back has been the people of New Orleans, who love its very essence, who call it home, who are determined to rebuild the city. I think certainly there have been investments by the federal government, investments by the state, but it's really been a grassroots, bottoms-up effort that has propelled the comeback of the city. Now, it's important that while there is, and there's been important progress with this comeback, there's still many New Orleans neighborhoods that remain left behind. So we've got to understand this in the context of it's too early to claim a complete comeback or a complete success.
And we only have 45 seconds.
Even when the government drug its feet, even when the leadership was fiddling and faddling, the people of New Orleans were determined to rebuild their homes, rebuild their businesses, rebuild their schools, rebuild their cultural and civic institutions to bring the city back.
And we have only 30 seconds left here, but are you confident that the city is getting the corruption issue behind it now?
I think this is an ongoing battle, not only in New Orleans and in Louisiana, but in many communities across the nation. And my hope and my plea is that the generation of elected officials who are leading now and in the future will hold themselves to the highest levels of personal integrity. And remember that elected office is a calling, it's a public service, it's not for private gain.
Okay, Mark Morial, thank you for spending some time with us today.
Happy
Enjoy
Mardi
Fat
Gras.
Tuesday, and happy Mardi Gras to everybody. Tomorrow on AriseXchange, renowned bank analyst Dick Bowe stops by to discuss his new book, Why America Needs Big Banks. I'm Andrew Schmertz. Thanks for watching AriseXchange.